Well, we have reached the final lecture and chapter in this course, and this is going to discuss the digital present. This third edition of the history book was actually came out in 2019, so obviously in 6 years, a lot of things have changed. He does have a new book out called, I think, The Digital Age, which you can check out. I will actually post a link in this module, but something to, definitely something to look at. But I think this still gets you pretty current. So the last 2 decades have really witnessed a transformation due to digital technology. It's really moved this profession and really the world forward quite quickly. It's still in the beginning stage. I think we're still going to be seeing a lot of things happening with AI and all that kind of stuff, but you can definitely see these changes in the field of graphic design for sure. So, the term graphic design doesn't really seem to encompass everything that is involved. A lot of times I'll just say design in general because it does encompass web and mobile and app and media, wayfinding, all those things. So it really is an expanding field. So back to sort of the 1990s, we'll kind of end at the 2000s, but this idea of embracing a hybrid style, which is inspired by science fiction, video games, technology. Those are all things that were huge at this time. And it was really a big contrast from the grunge look. If you remember, the grunge look was kind of harkening back to handmade things and photocopiers and, this idea of technology really, and even the advent of the computer brought people to more of a digital aesthetic. You could see this in the work of Wolfgang Weingart, April Greiman, but really the technology influenced design in a huge way. So, kind of the same way the machine had been embraced by Russia and even Europe in the 1920s. A lot of people still believe that the digital age would transform society for the better, and designers, artists, thinkers really welcomed this new age. This idea of a digitopia. So, Wired Magazine, you guys may have heard of this and you should look it up if you haven't, but it was one of the major publications that really embraced the belief that this upcoming technological utopia was near and that they embraced it. And the team was led by, this should be Louis Rosetto, and John Plunkett. And they really wanted to create a visual style that really showed the importance of the coming age of technological wonders. So this is a spread from the very first issue, and it featured this idea called a mind grenade. Excuse me, and it combined a quote by Marshall McLuhan, who was an innovative theorist, and he really predicted long before the digital age had begun that evolving technology would have a huge impact on modern society. And what they did in this layout, they actually used scanned photographs, Illustrator, Quark Express, which was sort of the predecessor to InDesign, and they created this chaotic image that grabbed the viewer's attention with fluorescent colors, which was really became the color palette of Wired magazine. And they call this sort of a kinetic visual punch. So you can kind of still see aspects of grunge, but also aspects of this clean digital technology type imagery. Again, this mind grenade was featured, and it kind of delved into computer viruses, which was a new thing that also happened with the advent of everybody using computers. And so this idea of these abstract shapes speeding horizontally across a spread, and that is this this image right here by Johann Vipper. And really this cool palette of the image contrasts with the warmer colors and vertical emphasis of the letters. So you can kind of read it, kind of not, but the letters seem to float on top of the image. And this strong red line shoots in the middle row of the text, which kind of gives the page a divided structure. And this image is typical of technological utopianists who focused on the depictions of the net or the matrix with this new world of cyberspace. So the digital aesthetic of the 1990s was also adopted by commercial entities, advertising agencies, and everybody at this time wanted their branding to appear futuristic. So this is a print ad for Nike created by Me Company, and it just shows how effectively this style could be applied to sports advertising. So you see this sort of cyborgish football player, almost harkening back to futurism and vorticism, this man, part machine, shooting missile-like balls at the viewer. And really, this is very smooth, very textureless, so you can really see the video game aspect to this. And then this is also when we start seeing the things coming to the World Wide Web. So the 1990s showed graphic designers making use of new digital tools, and the first web browsers, which were actually introduced as early as 1990, but it wasn't until the middle of this decade that design started to become integral to the World Wide Web. The earliest commercial websites, if you go back to those anyway, they're really funny because they're just these simple designs that kind of tried to emulate the print branding. They kind of tried to keep that print look on the web. So really designers just used the same skills they had in print, but then, the coders were sort of brought into this for the back end of things. But as web design technology continues to evolve, they all of a sudden became dependent on motion graphics. It really seemed like motion and web come together. And so while some graphic designers worked in both print and web, there's still separation between those two spheres. And I feel like there's still separation today between those two spheres. A lot of people will say they either do print or web. And really, web design came at an age where there was really no movement. Again, you can see in postmodernism that we're embracing sort of all movements. So the web was kind of able to kind of make its own movement or aesthetic development. And as inexpensive desktop software became available, really hundreds of millions of amateurish pages cluttered the web, creating a visual chaotic environment. I don't know if you're old enough to remember MySpace, but you could basically, without knowing any code, go in and kind of modify your pages. But in my opinion, they all seem to be like a hot mess. So since then, the web has sort of been corporatized. Non-designers were sort of steered into templates, while web designers did things that were a little bit more exciting. So this is the advent of WordPress. And really, as web design matured, it's interesting how Apple, Microsoft, and Google have embraced an updated version of the international style. So they're kind of going back to that clean, crisp, orthogonal design, sans serif type, and grids. So this site maintained by FedEx, this is from 2002, simple, unassuming, and you can see the logo very clearly. But if you look at this, so much text. So you can kind of see, it's an extension of the other graphic output, envelopes, trucks, retail stores, that they already had a clean, functional look. If you look at the FedEx website today, it's probably a lot different. And then this also brings us to motion, interactivity, and Flash, which really only had a 10-year lifespan. So Web 2.0 refers to the central role that interactivity played. It was really a big wave of change. Corporate clients who had recently refrained from creating like quote unquote rich media websites because some, computers at the time, a lot of times couldn't handle that. And if you think of like modems and that kind of speed. But because of broadband access, internet now being capable of having bigger files, corporations, advertising agencies, brands could really utilize multimedia plugins, including Flash at the time. It worked with many applications, and it really became the structure behind YouTube videos, animated banners. And by 2010, it had said that it was installed on over 90% of desktop computers worldwide. If you do remember, though, I believe, and I could be wrong, I'll have to look this up, but I believe the iPhone was one of the devices that actually couldn't use Flash for some reason. So what happened with Flash is you saw the simplicity of the FedEx site. a lot of websites that utilized Flash became really beautiful, really complex. The idea of motion and being able to move things. So I don't know if this website is still live, but the Museum of Modern Art had an exhibition that it was like a survey of digital art. And so you could swipe over the different time periods and look at the different art of the time. So, the screen moved from left to right, and when the cursor crossed the different planes, the user could see the name of each exhibition, their themes, and they would appear and disappear. I think, let's see if we can open this link. This might not work anymore, but let's see. Yeah, I wondered. So, now it's changed a lot. At the time, when I first started doing this class, you could kind of see the website, but unfortunately, you can't view it anymore, which is kind of a bummer. So the viewer who tries to browse a website, you could notice sort of the ease and difference between the aesthetics between that and the FedEx website. So the FedEx website is not very visually interesting, but it is more business oriented. You really just went to ship a package, buy materials. But the floating text fields of the 0101 site in some cases might have been difficult to manage for people. There was like a user's guide on it. So there was this kind of transition between too complex and too simple. And really, one of the big changes in web design over the last few years, and again, we're kind of late 90s, early 2000s, was really mastering the technology behind motion graphics. So the designer who specialized in static web design could learn to make motion graphics, but they kind of started splitting up because it was such a specialty. The motion graphics area is complicated because it's really a hybrid feel. It combines skills common to the graphic designer, such as, typography, hierarchy, layout, color theory, but they also have to have the skills of an animator. So the graphic designer's knowledge of typography and general layout were essential to making motion graphics visually effective. But the animator, so you're bringing in motion, so that kind of fourth element really complicates things. So you have to be able to also think of sequencing and flow and transformations. So a good example of the push toward amusing motion-oriented interactive websites was the website created by the Barbarian Group for Comcast. And this was, again, a Flash-based site, so we probably can't open this either. But what it did is it created a number of interactive elements, including a series of games, which visitors manipulated the mouse to take part in trivia contests in order to create their own digital puppets. So again, I don't think this is going to open, but we can give it a try. And if it does work, I will post it to, this doesn't work either. And I'm going to get out of here because who knows what that is. So this was another interactivity element, and it, kind of engaged, educated. The project was to elevate the ecological knowledge of consumers, encouraging a way of life that is friendly to the environment. And I'll show the image here soon. It used the interactive elements to persuade people, the viewer, into joining forces with the site's creators. So you can see this here. You can see the contributions of other visitors to the site with the little speech bubbles. And so, you kind of started planting things in pots. It was the group's purpose overall was to plant seeds of ecological activism. So it was also very interactive in 2005, and it did use Flash, which I think is why you can't view that site anymore. Another niche in the world of digital aesthetic was pixel art. And this was explored by members of eBoy, which is a collaborative studio opened by Kai Weimer, Stefan Soterig, and Sven Smittal. And it was a Berlin and Vancouver-based company who their work spread globally. And it really was, this idea of the pixel art was fresh and retro, harkens back to the bitmapped images of early Atari, and really were designed before the smoothing software had evolved. So they created an interactive website for Honda where you could kind of go in and build your cars. So the cars and buildings are showed in isometric views. You can see the three-dimensional shapes here, and there's also a lot of fun things happening in the background, such as the children playing soccer. And again, I'm going to click on this, but I doubt this will work either, but we'll see. Because again, all these are Flash. Yep, I didn't think so. Obviously, that is also not going to work. But it was a really cool interactive way to show a brand. You can see such a huge change between this and that original FedEx website. This is another example. So when Snakes on a Plane, if you remember that movie that was released in 2006, they created this web-based advertisement banner that had Flash aspects so people could really interact with it. So this idea of a movie having a pre-release web presence, but unfortunately this internet buzz didn't translate to ticket sales. So, which was really interesting because they saw that consumers were willing to immerse themselves into a marketing campaign without ever really caring to actually go see the movie. The next slide is all about Daniel Brown's work, and he was an interactive designer and an experimental digital artist. And so he was really inspired by the rich interactivity of video games, and he created this flower construction tool which allowed visitors to visualize how their actions produce carbon emissions, which was really interesting, focusing on the environment. And another example of the prominent role that sustainability issues have played in the design culture, which are still really important today. And this is another website for that Yugo Nakamura created for MoMA. And it was an informative, interactive experience that combined a basic grid-based format, so you can see sort of the 6-column grid. He used Helvetica, and really, the idea of scrolling really came to play here. So in this case, this scrolled horizontally. I think nowadays, we're all just used to scrolling vertically. So this ends the first part of chapter 11. The next lecture we'll talk about the second half and finish up the book and finish up this course.